Welcome, everyone. It's a great honor to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Niwaeli Kimambo, who is an assistant professor of geography and a CV Starr Fellow at International Studies at Middlebury College in Vermont. Also, her credentials, she has a master's and PhD in geography from University of Wisconsin-Madison and a bachelor from Brown University. So Dr. Kimambo has been invited to Cornell to visit us here by the Institute for African Development, and she'll just be here until tomorrow. So if you would like to meet up with her, you really have to hurry up because you'll be very excited after this seminar. But you will also have a chance tomorrow. She will give another talk with the Institute of African Development in that seminar series that is in Ives Hall 109 from 11:15 to 12:05. So if you're excited about the topic today, tomorrow you can continue getting deeper into it and maybe more discussions and practical aspects to it. So I encourage you to follow up with Dr. Kimambo. She is an interdisciplinary researcher using remote sensing and fieldwork, among other methods, to analyze rapid land use change of rural-urban areas in East Africa. And today she will introduce us to the phenomenon of an emerging tree crop coverage in rural areas in East Africa and how that is linked to distant urban stakeholders. Well, having started my career in agroforestry in East Africa, I'm very excited to learn all about, and this looks very familiar to me as a landscape. I'm very excited to learn more about it. Welcome, and the floor is yours. And one thing I wanted to say, sorry, we're just getting new ideas about speakers for next semesters. So if you have any recommendations or ideas of who we could invite as speakers for next semesters, do that as soon as possible. Reach out to Ed Mibaya or to myself, or yeah, we would welcome any interesting suggestions. Thanks so much and welcome, and very excited to hear your seminar.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes. You all look so awake for middle of the week, middle of the day. Thank you for being here. And thank you to Dr. Steiger for that very generous introduction. I'm very honored to be visiting you. I have received such a warm welcome from Dr. Beznakar and Dr. Mabaya. Thank you. And then Mariah, of course, who does magic for you guys. So thank her. Thank you so much for all the work. I'm excited to spend some time with you. If we don't get through all your questions today, come to the EAD seminar tomorrow and we can talk even more about our own positionalities as researchers and how we approach studying land use in Africa. So cool. So at this presentation, I'm sharing some work in progress. Be nice to me. This is still things I'm thinking about, but ask me questions about how I am approaching the work and the methods I'm using. I'm very eager to share some of these early empirical work of studies based in Uganda and Tanzania. Okay. Technology is my friend, and technology is not advancing the slides. Should I press harder?
No. Try now.
Did you see that? It worked. Okay. Before I get really in the weeds, I want to give you an overview of some global policies that I have been thinking about and how they are colliding with some of the ongoing rural landscape transformations in sub-Saharan Africa. Okay. A geographer always starts with a map. This is one that has actually gotten a lot of pushback. It was produced around year 2009, and it was made by the World Resources Institute, trying to highlight that we have a lot of opportunity for restoring landscapes. Restoring landscape meaning bringing places that used to be forest or used to be of high biodiversity value, back to their former value, right? The reason it received a lot of pushback is that, it was very general in where it identified opportunities for restoration. But this is sort of where the dialogue was at, right? The world was looking around at the loss in tree cover and its detrimental effects to biodiversity, to carbon, and to livelihoods, and thinking that we need to go in there and help these landscapes recover. Okay? So at the time, how did they go about doing this? How they went about doing this is by making promises. So lots of countries would set these really ambitious targets for restoration. So this map here is showing targets from African countries where they would say, we're going to restore X million hectares in this country. We're going to set aside this land. We're going to restore the said locations. At the time, these were not particularly specific pledges. They didn't have to say where, they didn't have to say how, and they didn't have to say by whom, right? But this did not live in the world of promises for long, right? So 2009, that general map comes around, the Bonn Challenge gets put forth to restore lots and lots and millions of hectares. The United Nations declares a decade of restoration, 2021 to 2030. AFRI-100 comes in play into 2014. And then around the Conference of Parties, number 26, I believe, real money started coming, right? With funds coming from people like the Bezos Fund. There was created a Terra Fund that was giving money to AFRI-100 to restore places, right? Once there is real money involved, what happened? I have this example here that is coming from the AFRI-100 side that is trying to point out that once real money came in place, the restoration really became about tree planting, right? Different projects, I don't know if the font is big enough for you, right? Are wanting to plant trees, and they're saying they're gonna do it with smallholders, right? So I pulled out just two examples from Malawi and from Kenya, and they're both very, very, very tree-focused efforts, right? So this funding is now in its second round, right? So we haven't actually seen a lot of money go into these landscapes, but you're starting to get the feel that these ambitious pledges are actually starting to unfold into real places, okay? Now, it's not like those landscapes were just sitting there, perfectly nice blank slate waiting for restoration to happen to them. The landscapes were doing their own thing, which is something I have been paying attention to, in that they were already undergoing this rapid transformation, and in some locations experiencing tree planting. So in the sites I've been working in Tanzania and in Uganda in particular, I have seen these planted tree cover next to protected forests. So these are young pine, and this is planted tree cover replacing highland grassland, also pine. And this is from Western Uganda, which is a mosaic of eucalyptus, tea, and some fruit crops, right, that smallholders are already planting, right? So global people making policies, unfolding as tree planting, local people doing their thing, already a lot of momentum for tree crops, yeah? And if you haven't spent as much time as I have looking at these kinds of landscape changes, this is a screen capture from Google Earth. This is from South Tanzania. This is a young planted tree plot, and this is a mature one, about maybe 7 to 10 years or so. And really, really, really widespread phenomena, especially in the East African highlands. Okay. But why? Why? Why would smallholders, whom we imagine as people who are, like with their one hand hoe digging a little plot, planting maize, why would they stop doing that and start planting trees? The market is always a force that we're hard pressed to contend with. And the market has been asking for lots of trees. There is a lot of urbanization that calls for construction timber. There is lots of rural electrification programs that is calling for electric poles, need for fruit, need for firewood, et cetera, the market. In fact, this has reached some popular press in the US, and I think this article kind of put it more colorfully than I can. Maybe money grows on trees after all, right? So trees are a really lucrative crop to grow. So I have been looking at these, confluence of forces and factors, right? That there's this land use that is fueled by demand, tree growing, and then it's also converging with transformations in policies and in land ownership. That is, studied in its own separate line of literature, and I will get a little bit into it today. And then there is this sort of global force, right, of like tree-based restoration and impetus for increasing the tree cover, right? So we're looking at this and we're going like, this is a lot of pools on rural landscapes. What happens to the rural smallholder that we have in our head, right? The one with a little hoe, digging the farm, planting some maize, right? What happens to this rural smallholder when all these things are kind of pressing in, right? So what I'm hoping to talk with you during this talk, right, is to think about how these forces are converging and to sort of reconcile the land users that we're trying to study in these rapidly transforming places, right? So I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on the theory aspect of this because perhaps you guys are not the geographer theorists, but if you are interested in thinking about what's the theoretical relevance also, I'll be happy to talk about it in the question and answer session. So let me present to you my two case studies, one from the Western Uganda and another one from South Tanzania. And then at the very end, we'll wrap it all together and go back to the question of the global policies also. Okay, first in Western Uganda. The work in Western Uganda is out of this site that is next to a protected area called the Kibali National Park. The parish that I'm working at is called Kanyawara Parish. It's a location that is in very hilly, fertile landscape that doesn't at the moment have any externally imposed tree planting initiatives. So by looking at the surge of tree lots like the ones that I'm showing here, so this is an eucalyptus tree lot, and this is these are planted tree lot, and this is a tree lot that is now, it has been harvested, and then the eucalyptus is repurposing. By looking at a site like this, we get a sense of what kind of forces are in play in this landscape. Some brief acknowledgements. This work is led by myself and Dr. Jessica Leroux, who is at Middlebury, Lisa Norton in University of Wisconsin-Madison, Richard Karamagi, who is a field expert, and then several of our students that have been working collaboratively with us. Okay, so what did we do? So at the Kibali site, what we wanted to do was to assess how much of the landscape has been converted to tree lots, then offer a ground-based description of what those tree lots are like, and then think about the owners, right? How do the owners correspond to the kinds of tree lots that we are seeing? Okay. You ready? What we did was we surveyed every single tree lot in a 3 square mile area. By we, I mean Richard did. So Richard went and visited each one of these tree lots and looked at what it contains and what it is composed of, and then spoke to the person that owns this tree lot. Okay. So here we actually define a tree lot as an area that contains at least 20 contiguous human planted trees. And then it has to be owned by a single entity. And then it can also include freshly planted seedlings. And it can also include recently harvested stuff that are left out to coppice, right? So even though this doesn't look all that impressive in a map like this is more than 500 individual little patches. And they represent about 230 or so owners. So you can already hear in your head that each owner might have more than one of the parcels, okay? So, and then the survey work was done in 2018, and then in 2019, myself and Dr. Leroy and some students went and filled in some of the missing gaps and corrected some missing information, etc. Those of you who work in GIS like I do, you just know how much data cleaning can cause you some heartaches. So I am with you. Okay, so we triangulated all the surveyed stuff with the remote sensing to see whether the tree lots that we're seeing on the ground match what we're seeing in satellite imagery. And then we also looked at the descriptions, right? The description of what is actually contained therein. And we did a principal component analysis, which I will explain to you very briefly, to see how the characteristic of the tree lot itself map out to the characteristic of the own. Yeah? Okay, here comes the results. There's a lot of these little tree lots. In a space of about a decade or so, the tree lots have expanded to cover about 20% of the landscape. So that little 3 square mile area, a fifth of it is tree lots. And lest you think that I was cherry picking to see the trees just where there are trees, I was not. There are also some in the rest of the landscape. So in my map here, this lighter green is the planted tree cover, and this darker green is natural forest. So there is a big speckle of lighter green even outside my dotted area here, which is my 3 mile square area. Now, yes, there are some limits as to where you can grow trees. It has to be a tree growing area. So you have more trees in the East African highlands than you have in the drier places. But in context of where trees can grow, we are seeing a lot of trees, yeah? That's the spirit of the message. And our remote sensing analysis can't see all of it. For some of you who have done some image analysis, this should seem kind of obvious, because if it's really young, that signal is not very easy to see in remote sensing. If it has just been harvested, the signal is not very easy to see in remote sensing. And depending on the spatial resolution of your data, if the patch is really small, which I'm going to show you some numbers in a second, that the patches can be really small, that signal is really hard to see in remote sensing. And then you're asking, Dr. Kimambo, why are you only studying things that are really hard to see in remote sensing? I make poor career choices. Okay. Those tree lots are small and usually in a low-lying landscape position. So this is stuff we learned from actually having visited the locations themselves. We couldn't have seen this in remote sensing. The average size is less than a hectare. So 2/3 of them are less than 1/10 of a hectare. They're in low-lying points in the landscape. And a lot of them were integrated in parcels that contain other land uses. So it could be a parcel that also has tea, a parcel also that has crop, it has some plantains in it. So it's sort of like a mixed agroforestry, like the kind that Dr. Steiger is probably very familiar with, right? In terms of composition, they're almost all eucalyptus and some are pine. But 11%, so maybe like say 10%, so that you can remember the round numbers, are improved eucalyptus. And Dr. Mabaya might have a few things to say about improved seed supply, right? This is a specific variant of eucalyptus that grows really, really, really fast. Now, eucalyptus already grows really fast. This grows really, really fast, right? It's taller than me in one rainy season. Okay. And then 20% of these tree lots have at least a few native trees mixed in, and the understory is normally left to natural vegetation, even though about 15% were intercropped with cassava and other annual crops before those trees were started to shade out the annual crops. So some farmers are just mixing everything in there, okay? In terms of previous land use, the respondents say that the land that is planted to trees now was most often used for food crops just beforehand. So replacing food crop. And some of them, the respondents say they intend to use the trees for firewood as opposed to a product that would require the trees to be really big, for example, an electric pole. Okay, so I've told you quite a bit about when you go in that tree lot, what is it like? And I want you to think about those characteristics and try to separate them out. Like if you have those characteristics in your mind and you're trying to separate them out into smallholder, household type behavior versus plantation investment type behavior, right? So this is what this principal analysis mumbo jumbo is going to do, okay? This my colleague, Jess Leroy, is the statistician here. I'm going to just explain how to interpret these findings, okay? So in this principal analysis component, we're going to load each dimension or component. So whoa, what did I do? What did I do? Let's go. That was too fast. Okay, here. I'm going to, this is a component, the x-axis. This is a component, y-axis, two components. The first horizontal axis, the first principal component is the one that is doing the most explaining of the variability in our data, right? So here, what this is saying that we have all these characteristics of the individual parcels. And if you look at those characteristics, they can be divided into things that are more of a woodlot characteristic and things that are more of a plantation characteristic. For example, we are saying there's this characteristic of having a lot of understory vegetation, or there is this characteristic that you're mixed in with native trees, or there is this characteristic that you plan to use this for firewood, etc., right? This is describing a less aggressive investment strategy. And then we have, say, this characteristic of using improved eucalyptus, or this characteristic of making sure that you have a road access. And this is describing a more aggressive investment strategy. So just looking at the characteristics of the plots themselves, we are learning that there are some plots that represent aggressive investment and some plots that represent less aggressive investment, okay? So remember we have spoken with the landowners too, right? Can we map the parcel characteristics to the owner characteristics? In our discussions with the people that actually own these tree farms, we spend a really long time trying to figure out how do we describe the different kinds of owners, right? And what we sort of learned is that there is an owner that the other people consider the person that is not from here. I don't know what is the Ithaca, like in Vermont, they love to hate on Massachusetts. What does Ithaca love to hate on? Like, who is like the other, you know, like who's
Usually New York City.
New York City, right? So like, it's like the person that is not from here, who is the non-local, it's like the New Yorkers, right? Okay, the New York City people, right? Those city people, right? So in this Kanyawara parish, there is that idea too, right? Who is the non-local, right? And at some point, the way they sort of like succinctly summarized it is like, will this person be buried here? And if the answer is no, then they are not local, right? So a big proportion of these parcels are actually owned by non-locals, right? So we are seeing that there is almost a quarter of the tree farms are owned by people that would be described as the New Yorkers of that place, right? And this has some implications on what do they actually do with the land, right? So if we go back to our principal component analysis and we take just the scores from this, like, does this represent a more investment type or a less investment type strategy? And then we separate out the parcels to be, the blue is you're owned by owned by someone who is a local. And then the orange is you're owned by someone who is described as they will not be buried here. And then the purple is for someone who has moved out, right, is an immigrant. If you squint, do you think that a higher score for plantation type seems to have more orange? It might involve some squinting. Yeah, I'm a pro squinter when I'm analyzing data. I think there's more orange the more plantation-like something is, right? Which is like, it's suggesting that people who are not living in that same place are approaching the tree planting as an investment rather than as just something to meet their livelihood needs, okay? All right, so what does that leave us? This is work in progress, of course. It's just telling us that there is lots of tree farms. The new feature of the landscape is telling us that there is some that are looking more like investment type, improved seed type, less understory, less good for biodiversity. And it's also telling us that size is not actually a strong predictor for distinguishing between plantation type and investment type. I may not have highlighted that as strongly, right? So when we're doing some of our remote sensing analysis, we need to be careful about size-based and location-based interpretation. We might be like, oh, here are these trees in rural places. This automatically means this is rural smallholder land. It doesn't. It might actually mean that there's a multiple players at play in this landscape. Okay. I want to give you a quick sneak peek at the second site and make sure that I leave enough time for questions. How am I doing on time? 12 minutes. Okay, all right. So the second site in southern Tanzania has been asking sort of similar questions, but with a different sort of study approach. And this is also another big collective effort that also includes some local-based NGOs that have been working on trying to understand these non-local tree farmers. So at this site, we have actually been trying to quantify just how much are these non-local people contributing to tree farming, and then trying to understand how is it that they actually gain access and manage their rural land holdings. This work is in the south of Tanzania, and here I'm just showing you a more broad image, right? So if you think of the East African Rift, you know how it makes this Y that goes up from Ethiopia all the way out to the Eastern Congo, and then it goes down to Malawi. And this little Y here is that part that is like the western arm and the eastern arm of the East African Rift meet and then go down to Malawi. This is Lake Malawi. Okay, so around this landscape, there is a lot of tree planting, particularly pine. And this remote sensing map here is, the scale is a little bit fudgy because you have to zoom in a lot to actually be able to see the individual places. I'll show you some highlights, but all the purple and the pink is places that has planted pine and eucalyptus and wattle, and some avocado. So if you zoom in, this is what it looks like, right? So this one here, it's actually pulling from a site that has more institutional planters. So this is like a company-owned plantation. There's some company-owned and government-owned plantations. And this is sort of the smallholder planters. So not a government, not a company, just a regular Joe that has planted some trees, okay? Now, I have always known about these two actors from my work in the region, right? I've known about there being these large institutional plantations and there being these regular Joes that are planting tree cover. But from my work and analysis, the amount of tree planting that is observed cannot be fully explained by just these two actors. So I have been doing the thing that you're telling me not to do, like trying to study really hard to observe things, right? Of trying to figure out how much does this middle guy contribute to tree planting? I have been doing some spatial modeling to find that out. I don't have good results to show you right now because I am stuck with spatial interpolation. But the initial explanation is telling me that the plantations and the woodlots explain about half of the observed tree planting, and then the intermediate guy explain about 30%, and then there is still 20% that is really unexplained, and we are still trying to figure out how do you apportion that. Is there another actor that we have completely missed, for example? But let me draw your attention to a specific case study of these urban-based planters that I followed really closely to understand how is it that they acquire and manage land in rural places, right? So I have some data that I compiled of an association of tree planters that is based in Dar es Salaam, out here where the Starr is, and they have bought land in all these villages that I have shown you in blue, right? Some of them are kind of close-ish to Dar es Salaam, but a lot of them are out here in that Y of the East African rift, right, where they're buying land that is being put to trees. And if you look a little bit closer, right, you see that there is some amount of spatial clustering, right? When one friend buys land in one village, then another one buys there, and therefore there is sort of like these little clusters of acquisition in these villages, right? Okay, you all have not spent a lot of time thinking about land ownership in rural Africa, have you? So it's not strange to you that urban folks are purchasing and owning land in rural places. Like you're not like, oh my God, that is so strange. Like to me, that was like really strange. I'm like, wait, how is this land that belongs to someone that lives in a rural place somehow switching hands and going to this person that lives in Dar es Salaam? Like, what? I mean, maybe the same question could be asked of like that house next door to me that was just sold to someone that lives in New York out there in Vermont. But anyway, this is new. This is new. And the way these transactions are happening is they are really facilitated by this network of intermediaries that are very savvy users of online platforms, right? There is this person that straddles this rural-urban divide that has created a, say, WhatsApp group, Jamii Forum group, Google group, that is linking together these interested urbanites who are interested in acquisition of rural lands and management. And he also is connected or knows other service providers or sellers in the rural place, or sometimes even directly knows a rural person that might be interested in selling land, okay? So middle guy hears about the parcel for sale. Middle guy posts about it in the WhatsApp group. This dude is interested in buying it, sends the money either directly or through the intermediary, through another money sharing platform. The money makes it to this guy. Voila, the person has acquired the land and can use this same chain to plant trees and manage it for trees and tells their friend about it, and their friend does the same thing for another person. Wild. Yeah, the WhatsApp farmers, I call them. So there is this new class of distant urbanites that are acquiring and land and managing it for trees. They are doing it sometimes speculatively. Then they are planting trees because trees are easy to manage, right? And I am spending a lot of my time thinking about how to quantify them, okay? So what does this mean then, right? That this is sort of like the rural land prices are accelerating. There's a lot of non-resident buyers, and it is really changing the, sociologists call it like the sense of place of some of these rural places, right? So what does this mean for global restoration policy, right? So when we are sort of seeing this global money that is trying to trickle down into tree planting, think about who is poised to take advantage of it, right? The person that is an aggressive investor, or is this the rural person that is more of like a woodlot type, right? So I want us to think really carefully about this sort of dichotomy between the land cover that we are observing, the tree planting, and like the land user that underlies them, like the complexity of who is actually planting the rural trees, okay? Have done such a good job of using up all the time, I am sorry, but I would love to hear your thoughts about this.
Thank you so much. Excellent. Maybe I have a I have a question. Having worked there in these landscapes 30 years ago, knowing that East Africa, Rwanda, Burundi, southern Uganda, western Kenya, each farmer at 30 years ago has planted trees, no? I mean, and had a woodlot, because farmers were self-sufficient in everything, including firewood, etc. So I think that tree planting culture is really something, and I think you showed that also with all those little plots, which is, I think, a long tradition of Eastern Highland, Eastern African Highland farming. Now, my question is, also what I've learned in those days was, if a farmer had land, let's say 5 hectares, you had to split that with his children. So that would be 5 children, each 1 hectare. And the 5 children have to split it again with the children. So the plots will get smaller and smaller and smaller, which was a big challenge in how to manage the landscapes. Now I wonder who is selling the land, or is those children's who would say, okay, I'm out of here, but I have land to sell. And because that's the who is motivated to sell the land? And is there some kind of community, I don't know, discussion about that?
Yeah, this is a really good question. The East African highland landscapes are not homogeneous. They're not uniform. Even in the ownership, the tenure, the conventions, right? These are wildly diverse places. I originally come from the northeast of Tanzania, around the foothill of Mount Kilimanjaro. And this is like a desperately land scarce area, right? But then the site where the picture you are seeing comes from, in the southern of Tanzania, families own entire mountains, right? It's a place where land holdings are at unimaginable scale to me, right? And it is a longer explanation about how that happened, right? In the specific case of Tanzania, there is a history of collectivization and people being moved to different places, and then they sort of magically maintained land holdings in both, like where they were moved to and where they left, and now they're sort of selling the land from where they were moved to. So that there's some quirks of history in some of these locations that are explaining what land is being sold. In a place like Western Uganda, it has a similar kind of ownership pressure, like where I am from. And the land sale is really that child that has a really little land and is, grappling with hospital bills, and land is the one thing they can liquidate at a high price because there is this sort of land rush, and land has quite a lot of value and people willing to pay a lot of money for it. Now, I had a really good discussion earlier with Dr. Wolf about this and about how my normative position, right, is like, you can hear it in my tone. I'm like, this is bad, right? Like this like transfer of land holdings from people that live there to people that don't live there. Like, my own moral position is like, this does not bode well for the rural place. But the question that I am now like grappling with is like, how do you stem the force of the capital, right? There is all these money and resources from the urban residents that is looking for places to invest into. Now it happens to be land. It happens to be trees. Tree growing is extra lucrative because of just the need for tree products, right? So how do you empower the rural landowner to have a little bit more agency in stemming this sort of, floods of capital?
Yeah, very interesting questions. Yes.
Hi there. I just first off want to say thank you for your talk. The topic was fascinating, but also the way you presented it with remote sensing and GIS, it really brought the story to life. I really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you. And I have a question actually going off of some of this. So it appears that the convenience factor of using these online platforms like WhatsApp, and obviously riding on the belt of trust, the references from friends saying sort of, I did this, it worked, you should try it too, allows these urbanites to purchase land that they may never actually visit, but they sort of know it's theirs and it's guaranteed. And if they choose to plant trees on it, which you're saying many of them may do, I'm wondering who is planting these trees? Who is maintaining? I mean, I'm sure some of it is rain fed, but then who is kind of almost ensuring that these trees grow without other people being, I don't know, whoever will need it and sees that the owner never visits, maybe they can just chop it down for their own use. So how do they guarantee that? And does this actually create jobs for, rural residents?
Great question. You see this middle guy here? I'm still looking for a good term to describe them. Right now, I boringly call them service providers. These are sort of part of this chain of intermediaries who are sometimes people that facilitate the acquisition of the land themselves and then immediately create a little bit of work like growing the seedlings, planting the seedlings, finding the laborers to go plant the seeds, right? So there is a network of, they're not professionally trained to do this, but people who ride on the wave of trust to do this sort of management chain. Fascinating people. They're very savvy.
I think we have some online questions.
Emily McGinnis asked, could increasing urban migration explain any of the ownership or interest in ownership by urban dwellers in rural areas? What about younger generations moving to cities? Are they then inheriting or buying family lands in rural areas or ancestral areas to invest there?
That's a really good question. It is true that once you start to like touch this tangled knot of land, everything everywhere is connected all at once, and like the forces of migration, looking for work, lack of prospects in rural areas, and what is it that I can liquidate so that I can move, right? Like all of these are really tangled knots. And sometimes I'm actually not sure of which direction the causality is, right? Are people moving to urban areas because they have now just sold some land and then they have this money that they can go use them? Or did they move because their dad sold the land and now they don't have land in rural areas and now they're gonna, right? I am not quite sure that we have paid enough attention to this bundle of factors to figure out how the rural livelihood and rural to urban migration is tied to land sales. So I don't know, Emily. I don't know.
Okay. Other questions? I'll go at the back. Not just the people in front.
Hi, this is Raja Humphrey Fellow from India. So I have either observation as well as a question. See, eucalyptus species being, kind of invasive, like it is known for high water consumption, It's like, introduction of this invasive species in throughout Africa will not, increase the water scarcity, number one. Number two is like, as I said, like, being invasive species, the net, the biodiversity will get reduced. Are you not introducing environmental trouble to the West Africa by introducing, Africa, by introducing eucalyptus as a species?
Really good questions. Just a quick answer. We haven't actually gone and looked at what the biodiversity impacts have been, right? Do we see fewer XYZ species in one place versus another? We don't know, right? Remember that I pointed out that if a farmer is managing their plot with a smallholder strategy and leaving the understory with more native trees and intercropping with things, it's actually, interestingly, a lot more, like it's not a biodiversity wasteland, right? But we actually haven't done systematic studies to know. In terms of the water uptake, that is also a really tricky question. Some of these, like a very narrow strip of the East African Rift is a really high rainfall area, right? These places get 2 meters of rain a year. I don't know what that is in inches, right? Some of these places get so much water. That's why these trees grow so fast. They are not moisture limited and they are not temperature limited. They can just like, right? So we haven't actually gone in and be like, okay, given the fact that these places are not moisture or water limited, what's the impact on the water table for this eucalyptus growth? We don't know. Hey, you wanna do work on it?
Well, I think there's the woodlots. No, I think they are a lot of the small woodlots are eucalyptus based, but then they have the agroforestry systems. There's many different other species that are used in Eastern Africa that are integrated within the cropping system as boundary trees or. But I personally would agree with you that it's eucalyptus is very replacing. There was no more on the stories and replacing any other regrowth. You had a question.
My name is Amanda, a Humphrey Fellow from Zimbabwe.
Hi.
My question is actually related to what he just asked around eucalyptus. In my country, there's a huge supply of eucalyptus seeds and a drive to establish big forests of eucalyptus in the name of reforestation against tobacco deforestation. And there's actually even movement by schools and other institutions to do that. 2 years ago, I had a conversation with a church-based institution with a very huge eucalyptus plantation, and they were actually complaining about the water table issues. What would you recommend as a solution, maybe an alternative to eucalyptus? Because for us now, the water table is becoming a concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. I definitely need to move from critique to solution space. There has been some really good work that is working on making more native species that are custom to the location more appealing. In some areas that I've worked in that are a little bit more east of the East African highlands, they have been trying teak, they have been trying planting more fruit trees, or even encouraging intermixing of species and not just relying on that, fast-growing eucalyptus. Now, it is really hard to convince a farmer to do something that will take longer, will be slower, will be harder to manage while they see their neighbor just getting a lot of money for the eucalyptus. So I think part of it is also how do you pitch this to a farmer that is seeing like the dollar signs in front of their eyes?
I think also in Zimbabwe with less rainfall, no. I mean, the ICRAF has done a lot of research on indigenous tree domestication and including indigenous fruit trees. And I think maybe you can look into that because propagation and, increased fruit size through indigenous fruit tree domestication programs. Maybe you can look into that and think about, because that has been, ICRAF has been doing a lot of work on these type of diversification of species, in the different ecosystems in Eastern and Southern Africa. Yes, so I have all these questions. Ed will also, yeah.
Okay, thank you. My name is Diana. Just looking at the market forces, as you've told us, there's a big market for trees, like in timber and other sectors. I'm just wondering, were some of the land plantation owners, were some of them like just leasing the land just to meet the market that they are looking at? And also a follow-up question. I know you said that this is still work in progress and maybe there's so many nuances that you're still looking at, but I was just wondering, with the conversion, especially in Uganda, 66% from food production to timber production, how has that impacted on food security, if it's something you've thought about? Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you. There is a colleague of mine that was specifically focused on the food security implications of this conversion. And it is really calling us to think a little bit about land use zoning, right? I think that the question is not, oh, would there be a food security impact if we converted all the food crop growing areas to trees? Like, yes, there will be. But the question is that, like, have we really had some amount of foresight about what place is for what land use? And I don't think we have had a chance to. Some of the villages I've visited have these land use plans, but they're really aspirational, right? There is a land use plan that says, oh, this location here is reserved for grazing or whatever, and then you see that is precisely the area that has been sold to non-resident growers who have converted it all to tree farms, right? So I think what I would like my work to contribute towards is like this conversation about like having a little bit of foresight about both land markets and land use that is actually followed.
Well, thank you so much. Exciting seminar. So many questions. I guess inspired a lot of thinking and ideas.
Thank you
so
for
much.
coming. Thank you
Yes.
very much.